Welcome to the Finding Gravitas podcast, brought to you by Gravitas Detroit. Looking to become a more authentic leader? Finding Gravitas is the podcast for you. Gravitas is the ultimate leadership quality that draws people in. It's an irresistible force encompassing all the traits of authentic leadership. Join your podcast host, Jan Griffiths, that passionate, rebellious farmer's daughter from Wales, entrepreneur, leadership coach, keynote speaker, one of the top 100 leading women in the automotive industry, as she interviews some of the finest leadership minds in the quest for gravitas.
In this episode, you'll meet Tim Fiore. Tim is the Senior VP and Chief Procurement Officer for Ryder. He is responsible for their global supply chain operations. He is also the chair and spokesperson for the Institute for Supply Management's Manufacturing Business Survey Committee, or PMI. He is certainly no stranger to the microphone. He is often called upon for his insights on the economy from leading business publications such as the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, CNN, Bloomberg, you name it, you'll see Tim's name come up. But today we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Tim Fiore as a leader, as an authentic leader. What makes him the authentic leader that he most certainly is today? And we will cover topics such as trust, high-performance team, what Tim believes it is and how he creates it. We'll talk about transparency, and we'll talk about attracting and retaining new talent, and a whole lot more. Tim Fiore, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's good to be here, Jan. Thanks for inviting me to participate.
Well, you have quite a story. There has to be a tale to tell behind Tim Fiore. This is the man who interviewed Dr. Janet Yellen on stage just minutes after we had her dancing. Remember that?
Yes, I sure do. That was quite a sight.
You know, it was part of a bet with the AV guys. We were at a conference a couple of years ago at an ISM event, and the AV guys were saying, you'll never get her out on stage dancing. I said, watch me.
You did better than that. You actually had her leaping on stage. She was leaping.
Did she? I know. And we'll let our audience into a little secret. There's actually a video on my YouTube site. But she was great. And you know, Tim, she was such a great, warm human being. I didn't expect her to be that warm. You know, what a great leader, right? What a great woman.
Yeah, I felt the same way. It was my third time meeting her.
Oh, was it really?
Yes. Unfortunately, in my ISM PMI position, once a year I get to go meet the Fed chairman to have a conversation with him or her and their staff. And it's something I look forward to every year. Unfortunately, with the virus issue now, we are not going this year. And we'll see if we go next year. So it's too bad.
Well, that was great. And that was the first time that I met you personally. And so now we get the opportunity to go much deeper. And I want to know, Tim Fiore, what is your story? Take us back to the beginning.
So I got 43 years in the business. I started in supply management in 1978. I was born and grew up in north central Connecticut, right near the Massachusetts border. And I had great parents. And I got my way into college. I got my way through high school, got my way into college. In those days, supply management people kind of fell into the jobs. They didn't go to school for it. I don't think there was even a school at that point who was offering supply management skills. I'm actually a second generation supply management person. My father's a first generation. He came out of the storeroom at an aerospace company in Connecticut called Command. And they saw his skills. He was a Korean War vet, and they used his administrative skills to do logistics and management of people and equipment. And he grew through the ranks. And I actually had my first interview by a friend of his who told me right off the bat, he said, look, I can't hire you, but I will give you an interview just so you can hone your interview skills. And I'm this 23-year-old kid who knows nothing. I still do remember, his name is Sam Pinella, still alive. I do remember the advice he gave me. He said, look, what you need in your life is a short-term goal and a long-term goal. Long-term goal meaning 5 years, short-term goal meaning 1 to 2. Keep those in mind and you'll do fine. So I got into supply management early on. In those days, I was hired by a great supervisor who was determined to hire a person into purchasing and supply who had a 4-year degree. It was not a common thing back in the 70s for that. A lot of people got promoted out of the shop and put into those jobs just to chase hardware. So he brought me in because I had a 4-year degree, and at the time I really had no idea why he hired me. Did a great job mentoring me and exposing me to additional challenges throughout the 5 years I was with that company. I actually worked for a company that designed and built a spacesuit and was building the environmental systems for the space shuttle program. And they put me on a small business that made rocket engines and other propulsion devices for satellites and missiles. So I had no idea what I was getting into, but boy, I look back at that period in my life and it's a great period. It's so much fun, so much experience. I learned what teamwork was really like, because when you're building a spacesuit or a space shuttle or rockets to protect the United States, there's no room for personalities. There's only room for performance. And I learned how some very smart people work through tough technical challenges to achieve success. And I was actually at Hamilton Standard, which was a division of UTC, when we launched the first 2 spacesuits on the space shuttle. It was on, I think it was mission 3. And the astronauts put one spacesuit on and it failed. They put the second spacesuit on and that failed. So they scrubbed the mission, came back to Earth. The head of NASA came into the company and said, you need to fix these things. You need to fix them quickly. And in a space of 6 to 8 weeks, we redesigned, fault tolerated, came up with 3 different designs, and launched 2 new spacesuits that successfully spacewalked. In a space of 6 weeks. These were guys that worked on Apollo. And these were guys that worked on the spacesuit that saved the Apollo astronauts on Apollo 13. So it was a really great experience. And it's funny, I was up in Connecticut a couple of weeks ago, and I went into a hardware store that I've known for a long time, and I met a young woman who is the granddaughter of the prior owner. I said, so how's your grandfather doing? Oh, he's doing fine. I said, what's this propeller doing here? It was a Hamilton Standard propeller at the front door. And she said, she lit up like this beautiful beam, and she said, oh, I work at Hamilton Space Systems. It's the great job, best job in the world. I love my job. She was actually leaping almost like Janet Yellen. So my wife was standing there with me, and I'm like, I can't believe this. She's got the same fever that I had 45 years ago, because, it's so important, your first job. It's the one that really motivates you. And especially when you learn teamwork skills like that, and there's no tolerance for failure. But, so throughout my early life, I liked to read a lot. My mother was a great reader. And I read a lot of C.S. Forester's novels. And he had a guy called Horatio Hornblower who sailed around the world on a British man of war and a frigate and went to all different places around the world. And boy, I loved that. And I really wanted to get a job that allowed me to travel and see the world. And eventually that was my 5-year goal. And I eventually got there. I've got 4 million miles on an airplane. I've seen 60 or so countries, the cultures and things. I've lived overseas for a while, which I still look back 20 years ago. It was a great experience. So, I took that first 5 years at Hamilton. My boss was great. He really mentored me to the point where United Technologies was setting up a laser weapon system laboratory down in Florida, Jupiter, Florida. So they internally went around to the CFOs and said, is there anybody who you have working for you that could go down there and help set up a system? They wanted obviously a young person who had a technical background that could work with the scientists, developing these laser weapon systems. And I was fortunate. I competed amongst internal UTC candidates. I got the job. And my wife and I in 1984, with 2 very small kids, packed up, waved goodbye to our families, and moved to Jupiter, Florida. In 84, during what was called the President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, we designed and built prototypes for space-based laser weapons, ground-based laser weapons, LiDAR systems that people take for granted today. So, we lived down here for 8 years, and then when the Berlin Wall came down, I had to go because I was too young to retire here. I went back to another Hamilton unit and worked in the aircraft systems business for 6 years, and probably the most difficult job in my career. High mix, low volume parts, driven by spares, a lot of challenges every day. Every day you woke up to a new challenge. So I did 6 years of that, and then I was fortunate. There was an organization at UTC that was going to do global sourcing, and I was asked to join that team, one of about 12 people. And after about a year of that, they asked me to move to Paris. So I went to Paris as the director of sourcing for UTC, I got into the commercial business quite a bit. Up to that point, I've been pretty much military aviation and aerospace. So I worked with the carrier business, the Otis business, got to know the Europeans, great people, lived in Paris, traveled all over the Eurasian continent, got into China in the 1993, I think was my first time there. I was in Chongqing many, many years ago, stayed at one of the nicest hotels I'd ever stayed in. Chongqing is about 1,200 miles inland, about 30 million people. And I also remember when I was in Shanghai once, I went to a conference there, and I remember walking down Nanjing Street, and I was the only Caucasian on the street that had to have hundreds of thousands of people on it. So it's been a great career. I now work for Ryder. I worked for Ryder back in 2002 when I finally left UTC after 22 years. I was Ryder's first CPO, brought some really good people in. We made a big difference in the industry, as well as with the company. Stayed there for about 5 years and went to a couple of other assignments. And then I retired for 4 years, and I was very happy in retirement, no doubt about that. I did all those. I restarted all those things that I had lost in that 40-year career. But I said, when people would ask me, "You're going to go back to work?" I said, "No, I'm not going back to work." "You're going to consult?" "No, I'm not going to consult." But if Ryder asked me to come back, I would seriously consider it. And the reason is that the Ryder people are great people. You can still find people there 35 years. The first thing a Ryder person will tell you is how long they've been there. The Ryder management team is excellent. I worked with them in the early 2000s, and I was very thrilled and honored to get back to work with them directly. The suppliers are very big manufacturers of big equipment, and over the years I've dealt with many of them, not only in the Ryder job but at some of my other jobs. So on a first name basis with several of the CEOs. And a lot of what we do at Ryder, we do supply chain work. So a lot of our customers are big CPOs. And after 40 something years, I know a lot of them too. So I decided to come back. I'm about 2.5 years into it, enjoying every minute of it, developing my staff, looking forward to retirement again. I'm glad at this point in my career, I got the energy to keep up with it. But it's been a great career. My daughter also is in the business. She's a third generation supply management person. I think that she's the only. I'm sure there are two generations, but I'm not so sure there are three. And she's a third. She's got a Sloan School MBA degree. She married a guy who's also in the supply world. So it's kind of all in the family.
That's amazing. You said when you started your career, you were the first degreed person that they put into supply chain. And I remember back in the day, it was the place that you put the deadwood, right? I mean, it was.
That's correct.
If people didn't have the guts to take action to move a person out of an organization, they put them in purchasing because they thought, well, how much damage could you possibly do? You're just buying nuts and bolts and screws or whatever you're doing. And look how far the profession has come, but also look at recently, just as recently as several years ago when I was in supply chain, I would say to people I work in supply chain and they would sort of look at me like, huh? What's that?
Right.
We kind of, yeah, well, maybe. And now everybody in the world knows what supply chain is because of the COVID situation. So we've gone from one extreme completely to the other.
Yes, we absolutely have. It's a great story, and I saw a lot of the evolution. I saw the corporate sourcing activity back in the mid '80s. Like I said, when my boss hired me, he hired me because I had a 4-year degree, but it was a little bit more complicated than that. Him and I used to go out to lunch like twice a week. We were that close. So at one point, after about 2 years into it, I asked him, "So why did you hire me anyway?" He thought I was really simple. He said, "You like to work on cars and motorcycles, so I knew you were technically strong and you could keep up with the engineers. And you had a history degree, which means you know how to research, hypothesize, and present an opinion. You were natural for it." I would never have thought that. So, the message is, hey, it really doesn't matter what your background is. If you can put all the pieces together, you can make it work. Because the most important thing in a supply chain job is really to get people to work together. And it took me a while to kind of grow beyond, I'm really good at what I know and I can apply it well, to how do I get everybody else to kind of apply the same amount of knowledge and skill and use their strengths to do something better for the company. And that's what's kept me motivated for a long time.
You strike me, Tim, as the kind of person that never stops learning and growing. I mean, obviously your career is evidence of that, but you're not stopping now. You haven't reached a point and said there's nothing I can learn anymore, because you're still learning and growing. And I see you're sharing your knowledge on talk radio, on TV, on publications. But what have you learned both professionally and personally from this pandemic? Let's start with the personal. What have you learned about yourself from this pandemic?
Well, so early on when this thing came about, I've got buying responsibility, obviously, at Ryder, and I had several people who were pursuing hand sanitizers and other disinfectant agents, and they were sitting around my office too. I knew they were involved in it. I didn't know how serious the whole thing was at the time. We were talking about it at the leadership team, but so I went to them, got fully briefed on what they were being asked to do, came to the conclusion that, we need a program manager to do this, because this isn't just buying. This is acquiring, planning, buying a bunch of stuff and then distributing it across 1,500 locations around the U.S. right away. And are we really buying the right stuff? How much should we buy? How long will this go on? So I remember going upstairs to a couple of my peers and my boss. I said, how long do you think this virus is going to last? How much stuff should I be buying? And we all agreed 3 months. It's 3 months. So, okay, I could do that. So I go back downstairs and, we got to buy 3 months worth. Okay, fine. So at our next leadership team meeting, I said, we need a program manager for this. This is more than just a buying task. So after about 5 minutes of going around the table, my boss said, well, Tim, why don't you do it? So, okay, I could do that. I know how to do this stuff. And I was so glad that he did, because I was able to rely on a lot of my experience expediting material and chasing hardware. And that's exactly what we did, getting all the stuff that we needed to do. But I was determined that, I think we all need to be near each other. So we emptied the building. The only people left in the building before the shutdown orders was my small team of 5 people, as well as the management team. So, and we were chasing things every 5-10 minutes. We were having to make a decision, had to stand up a warehouse to have it all received, had to engage some people to rebottle things. We had to repackage, and we had to get the stuff out into the Ryder community right away. Because my boss said to me, and he's absolutely right. He said, look, I can't ask people to come to work if I can't keep them safe. And we're keeping them safe. So probably about 7 or 8 days into this, we had order streams set up. We're mailing checks out. We're wiring money, paying in advance, whatever it took. I'm sitting in my office and I said, I don't know that we really need to be in the office to do this anymore. I think the urgency now has passed. And I think we can probably manage this remotely. So we did. And as it turned out, we ended up having somebody in the office who had contracted the virus, and we were all sent home anyway. But he had recovered, but we were concerned at that point that maybe one of us had gotten sick. So one of the first things I've really learned is, and I've never been a fan of people working from home for a lot of reasons. I mean, my first reason is, well, how are you going to get promoted? Who's going to know you? How do you get to walk around the halls? How do people get to know who you really are, how committed you are? People always wonder how hard you're working, because they figure you're at home, you're going to work however hard you want to, and that may not be at 100%. And everybody always says that, well, if you got the right goals set and they perform to the goals, what are you worried about? Well, I've always believed that people have infinite capacity to do more. I saw that back when the spacesuit failed, and I saw people working around the clock. And I've always lived by that. And I thought, if you're not part of the company here where we all are, then how are we going to progress you? Well, my opinion on that's all changed. No doubt about it. And I think you're seeing now in some of the media that even the CEOs are starting to wonder whether working from home is really great for everybody long term. And I'm not surprised at that. I think the culture of a company is defined by people interfacing together on a regular basis, socializing somewhat. So we'll see where all that kind of pans out. But I think the technology came along really well at the right time, because without this technology, we'd all be on conference calls. And being a global person traveling around the world on conference calls all hours of the night, I know what that's like. It's only partially effective. You don't get a chance to really speak up that easily. If you can't see the person, you're not sure what the body language is. But all this technology is really helping that. So, I think, and I mean, it's always the key is that you generally in an organization, you have 10 to 20% who are really strong performers, 10% who are not performers really hardly at all, and the rest that are in the middle. And if you accept the fact that, look, you really can't do much about the ones that aren't going to perform to your expectations, and you concentrate on the high performers and the ones in the middle, and ask them to do a little bit more, then you get a lot more out of it. So I've kind of sat back and said, between the commuting and the lack of travel and the inefficient meetings, you'd have a meeting, and if it was an hour meeting, you'd be there for an hour. Now, if you have an hour Teams or Zoom meeting, if it's over in 20 minutes, everybody's gone on to the next thing. And with everybody being essentially chained to their computer and monitor, you can reach anybody anytime. We have executive calls with our key suppliers, and the Ryder executive team gets on the Teams call along with the executives of the big OEs, and we're able to schedule these calls in 4 weeks. In the past, it would take us 4 months to align calendars. Now it's 4 weeks, so we're really doing things a lot faster, and at this point, I think a lot more efficient. I think we're a lot more productive. But the problem is how do you define the company's culture? Can you really do it remotely by a number of people living everywhere? And we'll see. We're getting ready to probably hire our first person post COVID, and the first question that's going to come up is, well, do I have to move? And South Florida is an interesting market to recruit into, and it's a difficult market to keep people in. And I've experienced it several times, especially down in the Broward, Miami-Dade area. And so it kind of limits our ability to attract the best and the brightest from outside the area. But I think what we're going to do this time is say, look, for the next couple of years, don't worry about it. You can stay where you are. And longer term, from a career standpoint, we'll figure that out. And I'm kind of optimistic about that, is that we're going to really be able to access a different level of talent too because of that.
This technology that we're using, it's been around for a while. I mean, Zoom is not new. It's been around for many years, actually. But it took a pandemic for us to get over the hump to really embrace the work from home model. What advice would you have for leaders out there who are still uncomfortable with it because they still want to control what people are doing? They don't know what they're doing. They don't quite trust enough to let go. What advice would you have for those leaders?
Well, so I've been asking, we received a study that came from CAPS. It's the research arm of ISM and ASU. And they surveyed a number of companies about how are you attracting and retaining your under 40-year-olds. So we got the study, and I asked the people who work for me that are under 40 to take a look at it and give me their opinion about the conclusions. Well, they came back last week and gave me their opinion, and they ranked them. The number 2 issue was this whole issue around work-life flexibility, not life flexibility. Will I be able to continue to work from home? So I think now what's happened is everybody was forced home, and everybody has their reasons why they should stay safe, right? I mean, I'm not a 25, 30-year-old where I could pick this thing up and have a sneeze, and 3 days later, I'm going to be fine. Who knows what could happen to me? So everybody now has gotten that taste from working from home. So they know how effective they are. Their bosses are confirming that they're effective. It's going to be very difficult to change that. So the next thing I asked them was, all right, I got my direct team together, and I said, when my boss asks me what I should do as we reopen up, what am I going to tell them? So you guys need to tell me what you want me to tell them. And, almost to the T, we all kind of come up with the same conclusion, that we're not in any rush to get back. Why would you rush us to get back? Well, now we're in a headquarters facility, right? And Ryder has 40,000 employees. There's only about 2,000 that are working from home. All the rest have been out there in dangerous jobs, frontline people. We move material, we move food, we move drugs. We have to keep those trucks running. Like I said, we have 1,500 locations around the U.S. That's why it was so important to get that PPE out there right away. So what are you going to tell them? So I'm going to tell them, look, we're going to look function by function and decide what are the pros or cons for them to come back. So we're going to go level by level. There's about 10 different functions that my group actually does, and we'll come up with a recommendation. But my thoughts to anybody trying to work through this, and of course I work with all my suppliers too, because they all have a hybrid mix of some are in the office, some are not. Most of them are engineering companies, so they're very concerned about the culture. Engineers generally are the ones who develop a company's culture. You see it in their vehicles, the styles and things, and you feel it when you get behind the wheel of a car. We're just going to have to take this slowly. And, until you can promise people that they're not going to get sick by going into an office. Why would you force them back? There's no need to force them back. And if you do find that there is a need in the future, then figure it out. But if you try to force back people now who have gotten used to this, you're going to have a problem. The other thing that was brought up to me, a friend of mine who does a lot of recruiting, him and I had a conversation the other day, and he said, do you realize that all your people now are poachable? I never thought about that. I thought about hiring people, let them work from home. But now all my people here who like the South Florida area are now poachable. They could be taken to another job, and another employer will tell them, you don't have to move for at least 2 years. You can stay where you are. So all of a sudden now it's like, got to keep a close eye on this. I tend to try to take care of them anyway. I'm late career, and my goal here is really just to leave a strong organization in place that can continue the legacy. So, we don't want to lose them.
Tim, you just said something that's very powerful, and you said it, I don't know that you realized how powerful these words were, but you said that when you were asked for a recommendation, that you would have to give your boss a recommendation on work from home, that you asked your team to come up with that recommendation. So I think that there's a lot of people out there that wouldn't feel comfortable asking the team to put that recommendation together, that as the boss and as the leader, that they were supposed to make that decision by themselves. So, but you just said that because that's part of your normal leadership style, right? Let's explore that a little bit. You obviously go to your team for their input. Can you talk a little bit more about that approach? And how come you're so comfortable in your own skin in doing that? A lot of people would feel that as the boss, you have to make the decision. Could you talk about that?
Sure. So I mentioned that I lived over in Europe for a period of years when I was at United Technologies, and it was a big transition in my own personal style at the time. Prior to that time, I felt that I had some strong functional skills, and that's how I had been successful getting to where I was. But I also knew I had some limitations, and so my boss's boss sends me to Paris, and he says, "Okay, Tim, I want you to go over there and get them all to work together." So I said, "Well, how am I supposed to do that? Why do you think I'm going to be successful with that?" And he said to me, "Well, look, you're American of an Italian descent, so you'll get along with everybody." And I whacked myself in the side of the head and thought, the Europeans were notorious back in the 90s for not working together well. You could not put a leader in there who was German, managing the other 4 countries. You couldn't put a Brit in. You couldn't put a Frenchman in. It was just not allowed. But an American, at a time when America was really perceived very well around the globe, with apparently an Italian-American background, could be flexible enough to get them to do things together. The other thing that I've always been pretty adamant about is I would never allow anybody to do anything I wouldn't do myself. So I tend to do a lot. I don't direct. I don't delegate strongly. I'm actively involved. And the third thing is I believe in transparency. And I learned this when I was at Hamilton back in the early 90s, that if you can be as transparent as possible with your suppliers, they can't lie to you. So I kept with that concept when I went to Europe. I assembled teams. Everybody had a say. We collaborated. We were transparent with each other. We were transparent with our suppliers. There was no hidden agendas. And I've carried that through, since the late 90s. And I think that's what works. And I've actually worked in companies where that was really not the leadership's preferred style of management. And it didn't really work out all that well for me because, people expected me to just make decisions and direct. But I've always felt that the more people you include, the more transparent you are about objectives, no hidden agendas, and you're willing to put the time in yourself, you can lead people and you can get them to stretch their capabilities. And, through that, they learn and they grow. And that's been my style.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people underestimate people, right? People know if you're not telling them the whole story, if you're misrepresenting things. People just have that gut feel. They can just tell you're not fooling anybody. And I think the sooner people sort of wake up and realize that, then we'll have a lot more authentic leaders out there than we do today. But I have a question for you. We talk a lot about teams and team performance and individual performance. This term, a high-performance team, what does that mean to you? What is a high-performing team to you?
So I actually mentioned that term at a board meeting about a year ago, and they all looked at me like, what? So for me, a high performance team means that I don't have to do anything, that I kind of just step back and I just kind of watch and I advise. And for me, a high performing team is that everybody on that team is an equal and that they all cover for each other and they use their strengths to fill gaps in others who may not have those same strengths. And I learned that technique when I was first at Ryder. I assembled a small team of about 6 people, and everybody had their strengths and weaknesses. And I allowed them to kind of speak up and help each other out. At that point in time, it wasn't a common thing to help a peer out, right? You were, in my prior jobs, you were competing against your peers. So, and when I came back to Ryder, that's one of the things I really wanted to do. So I've got a really fun team, a really great team, and they watch out for each other. They know who's strong in certain skills. They know when somebody's falling behind, and they essentially manage themselves. And I set some high level goals. I'll jump in, obviously, and adjudicate if it needs to be. But I have very few disagreements amongst the team. They tend to resolve it. And I also have a pretty, I would call it a pretty diverse team, meaning that a lot of them have first gen European backgrounds that tend to be a bit more adaptive anyway. And so they're not like individual hard chargers that are going to run over everybody. And it took probably about the first year and a half to get them to believe that that's what I wanted them to do, that I wanted them to work together. I didn't want to delegate. I didn't want to have to approve. I wanted them to figure it out. I set the top level objectives. And I think and some of them got frustrated because not only did I want them to do it, I wanted them with all their activities to do it with their customers. I wanted their customers to have an equal voice. I didn't want to go telling anybody, this is what you're going to do. I don't believe that ever works. So, and they struggled with getting their, people who didn't work for me on the team to help make the decisions that needed to be made. And it took about a year and a half. And some of them felt it was slowing things down. I said, look, there's no time urgency here. What's more important is that we have a culture change and that everybody works together for the benefit of the company. And, with a company like Ryder, that we buy trucks, we service trucks, we send trucks out to be serviced by dealers, we buy a ton of parts, we buy a bunch of lubricants, fuel. It's all interrelated. And my role there is to get everybody who has those electric vehicles that are coming, autonomous driving. It's my goal to get the suppliers to match up with everything, because in the end, the person who makes a decision on what we're going to buy for new trucks gets the supplier's attention. But I make sure that the supplier gives everybody else the attention that they need to move their job forward. So it took a little while, but I think time wasn't time urgent. It's not like we had to save $100 million in 2 years. I did not have a sub-optimized objective. And that's one of the good things I like about Ryder too, is that they wouldn't have put me in that position. It's not the Ryder way. It's more, we've been around for 85 years. Jim Ryder started with one truck, and we'll be here for another 100 years. And we do a great job. And I think we perform better now with all of us working together.
It sounds almost too good to be true. It sounds like a wonderful culture and a wonderful place to work. And I know people that have worked directly for you who just absolutely loved the experience. But how, Tim? How do you create a high performing team that's got each other's back, where you've got trust and psychological safety, and that they operate as a unit? How do you make that happen?
Well, I think the first thing is you've got to look for the people internal to the company that will fit that profile. If you go out and hire or even bring in people who you know and plop them into the company and you say, okay, I want you guys to work together, they don't know the company. They don't have the relationships. They're not going to be successful in the long term. They'll be lucky to probably survive a couple of years. So I think the right mix is 65% of people who are in the role, get them onto the team, bring in another 20% from outside the role but within the company, bring them on the team, and bring 10 to 15% in from outside. And I found that worked my first time at Ryder. I tried to repeat it several times in other locations. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. In this case, I'm probably more 70% inside the company, and it's actually more like 80%, with only a couple of strategic hires that have made a big difference. So, and it's all a function of leadership. I mean, When I came in, there really had not been a supply management leader. There had been a function that had split objectives, a lot of focus on electric vehicles and things, which is all great. But we had lost our alignment with our key suppliers, and we needed to reestablish that alignment, and they were more than happy to give it. So, I think you really need to use the strengths of the people inside. And then, obviously, I teamed up with my major partners at my level, and they assigned their people to work with my people. And over time, they learned to trust us, that we weren't out to do something. And over time, we learned to trust them. And when that happens, it's a great feeling. It's all for the company.
Yeah. So it sounds like you really modeled the behavior yourself at your peer-to-peer level.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like I said, I wouldn't ask anybody to do something I wouldn't do myself. And I absolutely believe in it. And, I'm 40, like I said, I'm 43 years into the business. I'm looking forward to going home at some point in the future. I survived 4 years retired very well, enjoyed it like crazy. I miss it today. And like I said, I wouldn't come back to work if it wasn't for Ryder. So I'll put my time in to make sure I leave an organization here that can continue on.
I'm curious, if somebody from the outside comes into your organization, let's say you hired me, right? I come in and I'm that, you often see people who are new into an organization. They're desperate to show people how much they know and that they're going to have an impact to the bottom line. And sometimes they may come into your office and say, I think we should do this because I see people over here doing this and doing that, essentially, telling tales of their peers, right? You've seen that behavior. I know you have. So when somebody comes to you with that sort of storyline, how do you handle a situation like that?
Well, it's all about the long-term game, right? It's not the short-term game. And it's not about a sub-optimized objective that we may have. And a lot of people in our roles are savings-oriented. I believe that we have to develop savings, and we also have to develop value. We spent a ton of time in the last couple of years when the market really took off, making sure that we had advantaged lead times and slots and getting our suppliers to deliver as close to on time as possible. And that had a lot more value than saving $50 million. I mean, we saved our share of money too, no doubt about it, but you got to be aligned with what the business needs. And at that point in time, the business needed to be able to grow. And in order to grow, you had to be precise about execution. So we, that was our number one concentration. And then, we also looked at the savings piece. And like I said, this company's been around a long time. If we don't save it this year, we'll save it next year. But we're not going to do something that's not right just to score a win in a savings column. I've got a great partner in Tom Havens, who's heads the maintenance function. We work really well together. We know what the issues are. It's a very complicated business. And we just continue to do a good job at getting better every day. And it probably took us about 9 months to a year to get there. But we did, and we've actually made some pretty dramatic changes in some of our key suppliers that had a big impact on his operation. And he was as supportive with doing it as I was. And when you do a deal, you don't walk away from it and leave it up to the operators to manage. You be there too. I offer to loan him people. I continue to have calls with the CEOs of all of our big suppliers. I keep that line of communication open. Historically, we haven't really done that. And one of my objectives is when I do retire again, is that we have relationships across the entire organization with our key suppliers. I mean, these are big companies: Daimler Trucks, North America, Navistar, Volvo, Chevy, Isuzu. They're big companies, and we're a big customer. We're one of only 4 or 5 customers that are in our league, and actually only one of 2. So, and the industry is the type that doesn't really have concentrations in customers. They deal through dealers. So the dealers are essentially diluted, and they have dealer councils and things, but it's hard for them to get the mother company to move. And the mother company moves on its own schedule. When you have a big buyer like myself or our competition, our number one competitor, they listen and they move. And because of that, they become better companies. And they say it to me pretty frequently. And I learned that when I was at Hamilton back in the early 90s too, that if we concentrate our spend, we expect you to get better. and don't just stick fingers at each one other. Just get better. That's what it's all about. And that's what it is. The nice thing about the Ryder job is that it's really partnership development, and people use that term very loosely. I know what it is because we have so much concentration with 15 suppliers. We can make their businesses and they can make our business. And it's not like we want to walk away from any of them and they don't want to walk away from us either. So we're kind of forced to work together. And I think it works out for a great partnership. After all these years of doing this, I mean, this is kind of like Apple with Foxconn. Without Foxconn, Apple would be a much weaker company. And without Apple, Foxconn wouldn't exist. So it's a very similar situation.
We love to talk about innovation these days. And there's over 90% of CEOs have innovation on their agenda. And we love to talk about it. But often these companies will palm that off to their head of engineering or design or R&D. They don't think of it as being part of the culture. Innovation is part of the culture. And to have innovation, you must have trust because you have to get rid of fear. You have to banish fear. Innovation means you have to you try and you fail, and you try and you fail. So if you want innovation on your agenda, you can't have a culture or an environment where people are afraid to make a decision or come up with a new idea. And that takes trust. People have to feel safe in the organization. It sounds like you have built an organization where trust is a very important factor. So how do you now build upon that to get innovation? Talk to us a little bit about innovation and bringing innovation to the forefront from your team.
So, innovation there's two paths of innovation in my world, right? It's unlocking innovation at my supplier world level and making sure that innovation is available to my company so that we can evolve and stay ahead of our competition. And, think about electric trucks, battery powered trucks, think about fuel cells, autonomous driving. These things are all coming. And they represent threats to our business. I mean, autonomous driving essentially means that when you get to the nth state, whenever that is, you don't need drivers. And part of our business is we manage 12,000 drivers every day. So if you don't have drivers to manage, then I'm not sure, what the purpose is for that piece of our business. Electric vehicles. We've got thousands of technicians who maintain diesel vehicles every day. When you have electric vehicles, you're talking about replacing battery packs and brakes, and that's it. And the core of our business on the maintenance side is we take the problem off of your back. We'll maintain these vehicles. We'll sell them at the end of their life. We'll deal with the parts issues, the warranty issues. And 65% of that is predominantly engine related. So we need to be current and upfront and find our piece of that space. If we're just going to maintain battery vehicles, what does it mean to Ryder long term? So we're constantly innovating in other areas adjacent to our business. And a lot of that has to do with key suppliers, as well as key technology platforms that continue to come out every day. But, in my world within the organization of supply management, it's really trying something different from what we've done in the past. And, for instance, we have over 600 repair locations around the United States and Canada. And we spend somewhere in the range of $300 to $400 million a year locally. That is almost impossible to manage centrally, because if you try to manage it centrally, you'll probably tell somebody to use some supplier who's not a good service performer. And this is the area of spend where service performance is number one and cost is number two or number three. If you don't have the service level, it doesn't matter what you're paying. So we're trying to come up with a way to do that in the COVID crisis. The strategy was to deploy 2 or 3 small teams of 2 people out around metropolitan areas and or regions of the U.S. to work with our local people to understand who are the best service providers, who do they prefer to use, is there a reason, are there reasons for that, and then to really understand the finances around the business relationship. Well, with the virus coming, I'm not sending people out in the field, nor do our field people want to come and see them, nor are the suppliers going to come to a big bidders conference where you get 200 people in a conference room. So that's all kind of dead. So now we're trying to figure out how do we do this project at the central level and not have that full visibility and involvement at the team level locally. So what we decided to do is, okay, we're going to see if we can't strike relationships with key providers that are spread out around the North American market, may not be specific to a certain market, and we'll establish a better deal, and we'll see whether the local people use them or not. So it's only a partial solution. I don't think it's the final solution. I don't believe in spending any time on anything that people aren't going to use. So I'm nervous about it because there will be a point in time where I'll be recommending that they try somebody or use somebody, and I don't know the full story locally. But I mean, you have to be flexible. It may not be successful. It's a significant savings activity for us for the year. One of the things we're trying to do, like I said, we have a lot of dealers that support us around the country. Thousands of locations. We're trying to use the OE's relationships with their dealers to establish performance metrics locally, like stock outs, turnaround time for orders, and things like that. And if I can get that kind of visibility, which nobody at the local level has, then I'll feel a lot better about maybe developing deeper relationships with those dealers who are performing better than the rest. And the way I get these companies to do things, it's a competitive pressure, right? And that's where the transparency comes in. So if I can show a dealer body that the competing dealer body is operating better across 3 or 4 or 5 important criteria, they're going to respond. And that's really how you deal in an oligopolistic market, is that you force them to compete against each other. And with the position that Ryder has, the size of us, they can't ignore us because we're too important to their business.
Yeah, it's obvious that transparency is a very important value to you.
Absolutely. And we do a lot with, in our case, because we're a transportation company, a lot of our customers are also suppliers. And a lot of our suppliers could be big customers. And it's been interesting as we've been developing that concept. Obviously, every deal has to stand on its own merit. But our concept of transparency is not the same on the other side. So what I do is, since I am so transparent with the CEOs of all the companies, I make the comment to them is, look, if we're going to compete for your business, you should be as transparent as we are with you. Be as clear and not opaque. Don't sit there with cards against your chest. Show them, because that's what I show you. And it's interesting with a lot of because I'm dealing with other CPOs, right, in big companies, and I know them. But they have cultures within their companies that are trying to deal with this transparency issue. But since we are so transparent with them, and it allows them to be better companies, how can they not be transparent with us?
I bet they're shocked, right? I bet some of them are shocked at the level of transparency that you share. But you come from such a good place. You're very authentic. You're very real. You have credibility. You have integrity. How can they argue with that? But I'm sure you throw some of them off.
That's exactly right. And the time where you have trouble with that is if you're not really being straight and open, right? Or you have an insecurity that you're not going to meet your goal if you be fully truthful. Now, I'm not saying that you're total truth, but I don't hide pretty much anything that I can think of that's important to the relationship, and I think I get a better response for it, and I know I can establish that value prop of our management much clearer. So, but it's a culture changing thing for some of these organizations, because a lot of them have CPOs that maybe aren't as tenured as I am, and they're fairly new in a job. They're not as comfortable with themselves, and it's more like 3 bids and who can I get to get me the lowest price? And I've never believed that the lowest price was the best price ever. And if you're within 5%, I mean, what's the difference? I mean, let's talk about what this really means to us. But when people have sub-optimized objectives like savings targets, $1 million additional is important to them, and because they're being measured on it. And that's an unfortunate situation. I've had those roles before, and it's a difficult job.
Yeah. Well, it's much more than just the ROI, right? And that's what people are starting to understand and recognize. And if you listen to the work of Simon Sinek, I love the way that he articulates that. It's much more about the number. It's much more than the numbers. It really is about the people.
Yeah, a lot of these jobs get filled by consultants coming in, right? Consultant comes in, says you got all this opportunity, but you need a good CPO to bring it home, and then the CPO gets hired. The CEO hired the consultant. He's put $10 or $20 million up there, and he wants that savings. And you come in sometimes with the best of intentions, but in the end, sometimes you're forced to kind of chase that savings number down, whether it's real or not. And it's an unfortunate situation. I'm fortunate that I never have to face that situation again, I think.
You are. I think there's a lot of people still out there doing it.
Yeah, there are.
I remember when I started my career in purchasing, I was trained, I was told, well, your target is whatever it was, for this particular component, maybe $5 cost reduction, but then up it by 10%. And that's what you just tell them. You just tell the supplier that that's your target. So I was, a dutiful young purchasing agent, and I would go out there with this, well, but that's the target. And the supplier would say, well, why? Why do you need that? And I couldn't articulate a story behind it because it was just a made up bullshit number, right?
Right. Exactly.
And then later on in my career, I learned that it was much better to talk about maybe what were the overall cost objectives of the program. Well, what other things could we bring into play? Have a deeper, more meaningful conversation with transparency. It's much more powerful. And you get a lot more out of it at the end of the day, but sometimes people don't get that, right?
No, they don't. So I'm a target pricer at heart. I'm a target pricer at heart, and I explain to them what that target is. So here's our current cost. I'll show it to you. And if you can beat it by 5% or whatever it is, then it's yours, and find a way to do it. I think that's much better than give me your bid and I'll tell you it's too high.
Yeah, right.
For me, it's like once they've given a bid, it's really hard to get them to change because they're embarrassed. So you might as well target price them from the beginning. It's much, much quicker.
Yes. Well said. Trust and transparency are clearly important to you. They're two traits of authentic leadership. What other traits of authentic leadership are important to you?
Well, I think, I think what's allowed me to be successful in my role is over time, the degree of respect, right? I've been able to develop a certain level of respect that gives me some motion. For instance, I was very happy that at the time I really wasn't, but when ISM asked me to take over the PMI, I'm very happy to be involved in that. And the reason is that I get to use my 40 some odd years of manufacturing, discrete manufacturing and process manufacturing to interpret what the supply management community in the United States is really feeling about the economy for the prior month. I don't think I would have been given that role if I hadn't developed a level of respect. At the time that I was asked to do that job, I remember my daughter was the one who convinced me to do it because I was retired for 2.5 years. And I got up when I wanted to get up. I went to bed when I wanted to get up. And to do this job, not only do you have to devote 2 to 2.5 days of time to it, you got to analyze and write the report. Then you have to report on it. But you also have to spend a bunch of time during the month to understand what's going on with the economy because you can't do the analysis without understanding what's happening. So I really was reluctant to get back into it. She said, well, look, why don't you just try it out? And so ISM's asked me to shadow Brad Holcomb, who was the predecessor on the report for a couple of months. And in a couple of months, I started to get, read back into the business community and off I went, right? So I was glad I did it because I think if I hadn't done it, I probably would not have gone back to work for Ryder because I think I would have been that far away from business that I probably would have said, no, I think I'm going to rather ride my motorcycle around the Northeast some more and grow my garden. No, it's canning season now, and I've got 8 batches of 30 pounds of tomatoes that I have to can. Or I'm making cayenne peppers this year. I'm drying them out. I don't have time to go to work. But I think the fact that I got back into the business community through the PMI really helped a lot. So, I'm not sure I'm answering your question directly. I think I'm very comfortable with the fact that I've had a really fantastic career. It's been exciting, and it still is exciting. I never thought I would be chasing PPE at the end of my career. I started my career doing that. I never thought I would. We used to call it the toilet paper brigade. I never thought I would chase. And at one point, we were buying toilet paper for PPE because nobody could get it. And I've traveled the world. I've been exposed to a ton of different cultures. I've been to some really, really great places, and all because I was in supply management. One of the things I mentioned to you, I used to read C.S. Forrester. I looked when Sam Piniella had told me, look, get a 5-year goal. My 5-year goal was to travel the world and have somebody else pay for it. So, and that's when I got into the global sourcing roles in the mid '90s. That's exactly what it was, to the point where when I finally retired, I was kind of glad I wasn't globally traveling anymore. And now I talk to a bunch of sales guys and CEOs, and nobody's traveling internationally anymore. And it was such a big part of everybody's jobs and careers. And now, I mean, a lot of organizations now have gone from global organizations to regional, just to account for that. Because if you're living here in the U.S. and you're running a business in China, pretty hard to do unless you want to spend a month in quarantine both ways. So, a lot of changes. This virus has caused a lot of things to change.
Tim, what advice would you give your 25-year-old self today, in today's environment?
Yeah, that was an interesting point in my career. I remember I got married when I was 25. And I was working on a program called the MX missile, and I was buying the key subcomponents for a coolant system that kept the avionics cool so the missile would hit its target 8,000 miles away. And I got married, and I remember my wife and I took a 3-day honeymoon because I couldn't be gone any longer. I look back at that like, now why did I do that? Did I really need to do that? So could you have found more time to go somewhere different rather than drive to the Cape and back? thankfully, we've survived all these years. But I think the thing is, find a better balance. I mean, I think the longer I worked, the less balance I had, and it probably even got more acute the more I traveled internationally. And I also felt that since I did move at 28 for the first time, and I also saw that if you stay in a company long enough, you eventually bump up against the ceiling, and you have to wait. And if you're not willing to wait, then you have to move. And that's what I did. I was fortunate with my first company at 25 years. I had 6 jobs in that company. I had to move 3 times. And then once I left it for Ryder in the early 2000s, once you've left your mother company like that, it's never quite the same. So I ended up moving a lot, which I'm not sure is good or bad. My wife and I still wonder where we really belong anymore. Do we belong in North Central Connecticut, or do we belong in South Florida? Well, how about both? That's a good answer. So I think try to retain some of that work-life balance. If you want to pursue a career, you got to be willing to really do what you have to do, meaning you got to relocate. I at least I'm saying that now here in the COVID crisis where nobody's going to relocate, right? And we may be at a point where you could do a CPO job from 1,000 miles away as long as you don't have too big of a time difference. When I was working in Europe, most of my work was in Europe, but I still had a lot of coordination activity in the United States. And I remember working late, 9, 10 o'clock at night, conference call. Nobody in the U.S. started to work until 1 o'clock in European time, but the day went on long. A lot of personal sacrifice. Fortunately, a wife who was willing to put up with it. Family who learned and grew with it too, and has done quite well. So, I guess I don't know. My 25-year-old self, I'd say try to find a little bit more work-life balance. I mentioned that I had a lot of hobbies when I was younger, a lot of hobbies, and as my career progressed, I lost more and more of them. So when I retired the first time back in 2012, my whole goal was I had a retirement plan, and the goal was to bring back all of those things that I had lost over the years and keep the ones that I really wanted. And I was very active at it for 4 years. And I think if you're thinking about retirement, make sure you have a plan, and the plan is not play more golf.
Yeah, I would agree. And what I hear from you is, maybe if I can just summarize some of that advice, and that is, first of all, find a partner who understands your passion. And if your work is your passion, make sure they understand that, because it sounds like she most definitely has done that. And then not to sacrifice your whole self for your career. Understand what it is, and what work-life balance is different to everybody. It's not necessarily a balance. There are choices that we make in life. So don't sacrifice things that that are important to you. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think that's good. The first one, absolutely, and the second one, try not to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Try harder. Don't sacrifice so easy. Think about it a little bit longer. Right there was definitely clear career choices I made where I knew what I was doing. Yeah, and I knew when you get into a global job, you know what that means. That's a lot of time, gone, and it just comes to territory. And it started with me in the 90s with UTC. Although I moved my family with me, I traveled back to the U.S. quite a bit every 6 weeks. A lot of the traveling takes a lot. It takes a lot out of your personal time, and by the time you get back, you're jet lagged and a couple days to recover. And
Yeah, I think, Tim, sometimes people think that they have to make every decision in their life when you're in a global job like that for the job. And the reality is you don't have to make every decision for the job. It is your schedule, you control it. But you have to understand what's important to you to make those right decisions. But once you make that decision, you live with it.
yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, it's clear to me that you are a leader with gravitas. Gravitas being the term that I love to use to describe the hallmark of authentic leadership. Gravitas is one of those words everybody's got a slightly different understanding of what it is. What is gravitas to you, Tim, in leadership?
I think it's being comfortable yourself and allowing people to see your value and knowing that you're legitimate and that you live by a set of values. And I think that's key. I think, and that's kind of how I was raised. I still think about my grandfathers all the time. I think everybody should always think about their grandfathers if you're fortunate enough to have known them. Remember, they were hardworking men, that graduated high school. I remember some of the lessons that they passed on to me, and I would never want to disappoint them. So, and disappointing them would be by being not legitimate. So, or being evasive, or just trying to get ahead and climb over people. So, I think that's gravitas. I think it's being respected because you've earned it, and you've earned it because you've got the right values.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. So what is your legacy?
Well, besides my children and my grandchildren, I think I think I've been in a bunch of businesses now, and I still stay in touch with a bunch of people who worked for me. Where as I kind of evolved what I guess I would call now my toolkit, post post Europe. And I think that leaving these people in other organizations, continuing to support them and counsel them and watch them grow in their businesses and their careers is very gratifying. I mean, I came from a group when we were at United Technologies. We got the Medal of Professional Excellence when Purchasing Magazine was still around, and one of the things that they had put in there was all the people who had come out of that organization and became VPs on their own. Well, that was really all due to Ken Burton and Shelley Stewart attracting the right people in, putting the right amount of investment in terms of knowledge, and having the ear of the leadership of the company to allow us to be successful. So you look at all the men and women who did so well from that, and I mean it's more than two hands worth. It's it's really impressive. So I think my legacy is always work as a team, be as honest and transparent as possible. Don't be insecure with yourself to the point where you can't be. And it's all about continuously getting better. I mean, I remember when I left Ryder back in the mid 2000s. One of the reasons why I left was we really were not practicing continuous improvement very well, and I had been schooled in it really extensively at United Technologies. And I got the fever back in 1993 when I was out of Pratt and Whitney, Canada manufacturing factory, making jet engines, doing it in a lean fashion. And the VP of Ops at the time, Louis Chenevert, went on to be the CEO of UTC. And I really felt that was part of my DNA, was continuously improving things. It didn't have to be a big leap. It just had to be better every day. And I kind of lived my life that way in my career. It's got to be better every day. Staying still at the same level is not acceptable. You got to get better every day. And I think that's the legacy. You can do better every day.
Getting better every day, small incremental steps of improvement. And that is a beautiful way to end our time today. Tim Fiore, I can't thank you enough. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, same here, Jan. Great talking with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and you found something of value that will help you on your quest for your gravitas, then please share with your friends and colleagues and subscribe. Visit us at gravitasdetroit.com to find out more.